So good morning, good afternoon. My name is Frederick Winsness, and I am with NetHope. I want to welcome everyone to another NetHope Solutions Center webinar in our series. Today we're very excited about having our first No Loss Generation Tech Task Force webinar. And today we're going to be talking about NetHope's project Reconnect in Germany. Before we get going, I will go over our normal housekeeping rules. I have set everything to mute on entry, so please stay muted, and we'll have a chance to come off mute later on, potentially to ask questions. But we do want to keep it interactive, so please line up your questions in the chat window as we go along, and we'll facilitate a question and answer and discussion sessions towards the end of the hour today. We have a few polls underway, so we would strongly recommend you taking part in those. We'll talk to you about them as we go along. And as normal, we have a webinar satisfaction poll towards the end of the session today. We are recording this as usual, and I will be sending out a follow-on email and with the recording and the collateral and points to the NetHope Solutions Center webinar posting. So I am pleased to introduce Leila Toplik today. Leila is with NetHope, and she is running our No Loss Generation Tech Task Force efforts. She's going to be introducing the topic today. And we also have Sybil Fleischman. She is the program lead for the project Reconnect for NetHope in Germany. And we are ready to listen to your presentation, Leila, so I'm passing it on to you.
Great, thank you, Frederick. Good morning and welcome to our first NLG Tech Task Force webinar. I'll take a few minutes up front to provide an overview of No Loss Generation, or NLG, and also NLG Tech Task Force before I hand it over to my colleague Sybil, who will tell you about our featured topic for this first webinar, that is Project Reconnect. So first, we thought it would be helpful for those of you who are not familiar with the No Loss Generation initiative to just share a few key points about the initiative. The initiative was launched in 2013 to support children and youth affected by the Syria and Iraq crisis. It's focusing on three pillars: education, child protection, adolescents, and youth, and that's mainly livelihoods. A regional level NLG working group is co-led by UNICEF, Mercy Corps, Save the Children, and World Vision. And NLG partner organizations include organizations such as the IRC, NRC, DRC, UNHCR, and many others, as you can see on this slide. NLG Tech Task Force for Refugee Education was launched at NLG EdTech Summit in Jordan on March 1st, so about a month ago. It was set up by NetHope and No Loss Generation Initiative organizations with the support from Microsoft. And you can find more background information on the task force and the launch blog post that you'll have available through this deck. The main goal of the task force is to facilitate collaboration in the international development community and also between the NGO and private sectors, with the focus on ICT-enabled, evidence-based programs for refugee education. And to accomplish that, we plan to do a couple of things. First, establish collaborative information exchanges. So this is where both NGOs and also private sector companies are encouraged to share program design, outcome frameworks, technology tools, and similar. We will also partner with tech companies and more broadly with private sector companies to address expertise, resource, and funding needs for refugee education. In terms of the engagement, well, first, I think it's important to note that this task force, as you will also see from the kind of diverse group of people who are attending this webinar, this task force is open to all global and local NGOs, to private sector companies, academic institutions, and also host governments. And just to give you an example, our current members include IRC, Mercy Corps, Save the Children, Norwegian Refugee Council, INE, USAID, Carey Institute, Cisco, and a number of others. We plan to provide an ongoing engagement via monthly webinars, such as this one, information sharing via the task force website, and you have the link here on this slide, and we'll also show you the website on the next slide. And project-based collaborations, which will be much smaller and more focused in nature. We'll do additional in-person convenings at conferences, and then we plan to have a blogging program and social media to amplify the work that the task force members are doing. And in closing, before I hand it over to Sybil, just a few words about what's coming up. First, the purpose of these webinars is to address your most urgent needs and questions related to refugee education and technology, and also to identify the opportunities to collaborate both within the development sector and with the private sector. So based on the questions and insights shared at the EdTech Summit and subsequent conversations that we've had, what's been highlighted is there is a need for visibility into what types of digital curriculum and curriculum in general exists that the NGOs could be using in their refugee education programs. So over the next couple of months, we will be bringing both tech and EdTech companies as well as their NGO partners to share their work. Here are a couple of examples. Coursera for Refugees, Udemy's Program for Refugees, Microsoft's Resources for Refugees that offers a great wealth of training like digital literacy and entrepreneurship and more. And in terms of how you can participate, you can join the task force to receive future communications. You can share your case studies and program materials. And I'll just go over to the website so you can actually see where you can join and RSVP for future webinars. So you can sign up for the task force here where you see the sign up sign, and then you can submit your program design, your case studies, your materials under submit here. And then in the future you will see RSVP option for new webinars. But if you sign up for the technology task force, you will be automatically invited to attend the webinars. So going back, you also can sign up to present your work on one of the upcoming webinars, and then would love to hear more about your needs. And for that, we've designed a quick poll to get more information about not only who's attending this webinar, and you can start filling out this poll in this window, but also what programs and solutions you are interested in learning more about on these task force webinars or through one-on-one connections, what technology tools you are looking to use or you're already using and would like to share with others. So I'll hand it over to Frederick to just mention a couple of brief things about this poll before introducing Sybil.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Leila. It's important to explain that this is an interactive poll, what you have in front of you here on the screen. So please go ahead and fill this in. Not all the fields are required, but we would very, very much like to understand your position or your answers to these questions. So if you scroll down, you see it's easy for you to just click off your answers, and you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll hit submit. So we're going to leave this up for a couple or maybe a minute or two so that you have a chance to look at this. I will also post in the chat window the link to this poll in case we shut it off a little bit too early. So let me do that real quick here. Make sure I chat with everyone.
And thank you in advance for sharing this information. As mentioned, your feedback since the NLG EdTech Summit has helped us curate some of the upcoming webinars. We'd like to hear more, and both in terms of what you're looking to learn about, what are some of the pain points that you have, as well as what are some of the programs and tools that you could be sharing with this community.
Yeah, and in case you're on an iPad, you may not be able to interactively or interact with the poll that's in front of you in the WebEx panel here, but I did post this link to the chat window, so you can click through there and submit the poll there as well. So I think that's probably long enough, Leila. What we're going to do, I will move on to Sybil's slides.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Oh no, I have to take control here. Sorry about that. So, and then turn it over to Sybil. Sybil, you're on. I will give you control in a second.
All right. I'm Sybil Fleischman. It's a pleasure being here. I'm honored to be the first presenter on one of these webinars. And I'm looking forward to everybody's questions. I'm the project lead for Project Reconnect in Germany, and I'll be sharing a little bit about the lessons learned from our experience in Germany using Chromebooks, and very open to your questions so that we can focus this webinar really on where your interests are. Let me just jump to the next slide. Oops, there we go. Just briefly sharing, who's part of this Project Reconnect effort in Germany. NetHope is managing this initiative. And this was based on an idea from Google Germany team, and Google.org made it possible through their financial contribution, and RTI is supporting us for the monitoring and evaluation. And we'll hear more about that in just a little bit. Oops, I'm clicking up here. So just looking back at what it looked like in 2015, actually, when this project was born in Germany. This is looking at one of the border crossings in Germany. In the months of October and November in Germany, there were more than 2,000, around 200,000 refugees coming in every month. So October, November, it was each month around 200,000. And that was, you could not see this problem. So the engineering team in Munich, actually, the engineering lead there was trying to figure out how could they help. And one of the thoughts they had was, how can we help in a situation with online resources? And at that time, there was a huge need for training, language training, finding information on how would you go into the asylum application process, just basic information on finding your way within Germany. And so the idea was born to use Chromebooks, small web-based laptops, to help scale the training and information capacity in Germany. And really quickly, right after the idea was born, a small scale pilot was started with just 100 Chromebooks, and it quickly became clear that if you wanted to react and help here, you would have to react quickly. And from the 100 Chromebook pilot, it scaled to a 25,000 Chromebook project. The project, as I said, the idea was born in November 2015, and then the project was officially launched in January 2016 already. So Google and NetHope reacted very quickly. Google and Google.org brought NetHope into the boat because they realized they needed a partner who could really implement that project on the ground and had experience in implementing such projects. So we launched the project in January, and shortly thereafter, I'm clicking here, shortly thereafter, we had the first grantees. In March 2015, we already nominated the first grantees, organizations that would receive Chromebooks through Project Reconnect. There's a huge variety of organizations that applied, and we also intentionally selected a variety of organizations. You see some of the organizations that you're familiar with, Save the Children, Red Cross, SOS Kinderdorf, and others. And then you see organizations in the upper right. Those are classic education institutions in Germany. You see in the lower left corner, you see some organizations that are church-related. And then there's a completely new set of organizations that are focused on the refugees in Germany. Small organizations, some of them just founded in 2015. Some of them are mostly run by volunteers. And then just on the right side, you see Adia Erding, Refugees Online, and Asyl Plus. Those are a completely new breed of organizations that are focused on computer-assisted learning for education purposes for refugees. So they're really, really very targeted nonprofits that are popped up in Germany based on the situation in Germany. We selected all of these organizations and more than we could display here to receive Chromebooks from Project Reconnect, and I'll share more on how that then turned out in the actual use of the different organizations. Here in May, the first organizations actually already started setting up the Chromebooks and then actually deploying them. Not all of them were that quick, but some of the first ones were in May already working on the deployment of the Chromebooks. The Chromebooks we're talking about are managed Chromebooks. That means that they could be managed centrally. So the setup initially was minimal. They had to be registered once, and then they could be managed centrally if the organization realized there's additional resources that we want to highlight for the different sites. Then they could easily, just the IT admin could just add them either as bookmarks or add them to a central page. So that didn't have to happen all in the beginning. So that was very easy. In fall, we already had the first stories from the organizations, how they are using the Chromebooks in some of the adult education centers, helping women explore the internet and finding information. For them, particularly important, when they couldn't really just go out by themselves in the new community that just felt too dangerous, then learning how they could explore their new communities with online resources, or learn on what they need to do in order to help their kids get into school. All these kind of things they started exploring at that time frame. On the left, you see a young man who was trying to catch up in school and landed an internship at a pastry maker, and then made his first, what do you call it, a tart or cake. And he used the Chromebook to catch up on his math skills and language skills. At the bottom, you see the use in a welcome center where they used it for young kids to also just get used to the school life again. So we had a lot of different stories of how the Chromebooks were actually getting used. Then a little later, or let's say by now, we actually get more of the stories that say somebody was able to complete a certificate. Some of them are here, language certificates. The gentleman at the bottom was able to complete Cisco certifications, professional certifications. Actually, the gentleman who's in the in the center here with the lady in the white sweater, he completed a more advanced language certification and then was able to actually land a job teaching Arabic at an adult education center. So we get more of these stories that people are actually learning, completing certificates, landing jobs, landing internships, or like the young lady above who's holding up her certificate. She completed the language certificate and also managed to quickly catch up on her school knowledge, and is now in a normal high school class. And on the photo just to the right of her showing off her certificate, you see her actually in another class where she's teaching other kids about how to use computers, how to use Chromebooks. In this case, they're in a training session where they don't have those computers. But so you really see that now at this point, we see the impact the Chromebooks are making. On the right, the lady who is showing the Chromebook used to those two gentlemen, she's actually was named as the library hero by the Library Association in Germany, because she has initiated a lot of programs in public libraries in Germany using Chromebooks with refugees, where the libraries offer special programs for refugees to help them use the Chromebooks to study German in the library environment. So these are just a few stories showing the impact the Chromebooks have now. In April now, we have 43 grants made to different nonprofits in Germany. Some of those grants are as small as just 75 Chromebooks to one organization, and then some of the organizations are as large as 3,000 to 4,000 Chromebooks. We have a total of 24,000 Chromebooks distributed at this point at more than 900 locations. At the bottom, you see a photo from a get-together where we really try to encourage also the collaboration among these organizations, because they have such different expertise. Some of them have the expertise in working with refugees, but don't have the computer expertise, while others are really focused on the computer-assisted learning. So we try to encourage the knowledge sharing among the organizations. We started with many organizations actually asked for very large grants initially, and 5,000 or more Chromebooks, and then turned out it didn't need as many. That's why we still have some Chromebooks left at this point, and are just distributing those over the next few months. Oops, there you go. This slide shows a little bit where we have the Chromebooks distributed, and you can see that the distribution of Chromebooks matches to the distribution of refugees across Germany. We were hoping for that, and it turned out that way when we went through our applications and the grants we made and mapped that to states. We discovered that we mapped pretty well to where the highest density of refugees was or is. So looking back at the last year, what really happened, there were a lot of changes over the last year, which meant for us a lot of programmatic changes as well. In the early 2016, there was the EU-Turkey agreement, and suddenly the influx of refugees dropped dramatically. You can see on this slide here how the number of refugees coming in per month dropped from around 200,000 down to around 17,000 per month. So that is a huge change, which led to a lot of changes for the organizations as well. Initially, organizations were supporting large welcome centers where several thousand refugees were at the same time. So their initial proposals to us often included a proposal to work in a large welcome center, make the Chromebooks available there, offer some help on how to use the Chromebooks. But then when the situation changed so drastically, suddenly the number of welcome centers was reduced. A lot of them were closed, and a lot of the organizations worked in smaller locations and also in completely different sites. So they had a lot of more work heading towards them, and we saw these changes then in a little bit of a delay in the rollout of the Chromebooks. The idea initially was using those Chromebooks in large welcome centers to provide access to information and education resources. One of the goals was to use them for language learning, so that the arriving refugees could right away start learning German. because once they get into an official integration course in Germany, then they have about 6 months to reach a certain level that they need to have in order to actually succeed with their asylum application. And so by starting right away with the language learning, that helped them also extend that time that they had for language learning. Another goal was the information research, just for very basic information as well. How do I do this application thing? Where did I even land here? Another basic information that was needed after arrival, or also communication needs, communicating back with family back home or others that are still somewhere along the migration route. And another interesting proposal we had and that we saw implemented in a few welcome centers was reintroducing kids to school routine. There wasn't the opportunity in these big welcome centers to really get them in normal classes where they would have the normal school life, but at least they would have the school routine again, where I go into class, I need to be disciplined, follow a certain discipline. They were using the computers to study German in the class, to study math, and just to get reintroduced to that routine, and then have it easier when they need to go back into the school life once they land at a location where they will be longer term. As I said, those welcome centers were reduced. Many of them were closed, and so the Chromebooks ended up in other locations. What we observed was really a transition from an emergency response to what we call more of a programmatic response. The refugees were not anymore in this arrival phase where they just wanted to find some basic information. They were more in a phase where it was more about how do I really fit into this community now where I landed? How do I sign my kids up for school? How do I find a job? Things like that. They were not just arriving, they were now actually in these community. Many of them transitioned into small group homes or even family homes in small communities. And so other things were important. They were looking for jobs, they were looking for internships or professional education. So what they needed to find out was, what do I need to learn in order to be able to qualify for certain jobs? Can I do the online training? Can I do the training online in order to qualify for those jobs? Or where do I need to go in other education centers? How do I apply for a job? But also then job-specific skills, whether it's for certain professional skills or then the vocabulary that you actually need to for this job. Some of our grantees responded right away and created tools that these grantees can actually use to practice job-specific skills. They work together with professional associations here in Germany to create some of those job-specific language tools. So we have really seen amazing creativity and responsiveness from the organizations to make that transition happen from an emergency response to more programmatic response. Yep. Talking a little bit about the different locations where the Chromebooks are actually in use. A lot of them, you can see here, 36% are actually in school or education facilities. And that's actually where we see quite a lot of success in the Chromebook use, where the Chromebooks are very frequently used, and where we get the most stories of how they have helped somebody move to the next steps to an internship, or actually what we also consider a huge success if kids are integrated then into the normal classes and don't need the integration classes anymore. Germany offers something like integration classes where kids first learn the language skills and the teachers try to catch them up to a certain school level. This is also available for kids that are getting ready for professional education. They have a 2-year program, can also sometimes be 3 years, where they are prepared to enter a professional training program, a vocational training program. And I just come back from a visit to one of those schools today, and it's amazing to see the Chromebooks in use there to really help those young men, and mostly men, but also some women, to catch up and get a foot into the German education system, and then hopefully for a career. We see here some refugee homes. Those are mostly smaller homes. There's some use in public libraries and youth centers. And you see the number of welcome centers is relatively small, not the number, but the percentage of Chromebooks used in welcome centers is relatively small. As I said initially, that percentage in the proposals was very high, and it's now just down to 3%, and more of them are getting closed all the time. Services for the refugees at those locations are over great variety. You can see here also childcare, which is interesting because sometimes the childcare is specifically offered in order to draw women in to actually use the Chromebooks, because without having childcare, they can't actually go to the Chromebook facilities or to the facilities where the Chromebooks are hosted or made available. For some organizations that was successful, but it's still, if the travel from where the refugees are hosted to where the Chromebooks are is too long, then childcare alone does not lure them to the Chromebooks. It's just one of the challenges the organizations sometimes faced, where offering the Chromebooks alone isn't enough, and they need to try to offer additional services so that the Chromebooks actually can be used by some of their target audiences. Talk briefly about a few implementation challenges. Here, just a slide where we show some of the challenges for the grantees. One of the ones that was really surprising for us is connectivity. Connectivity has been a huge problem for the grantees. Again, part of that because they were planning to provide internet connectivity for a few sites, and now they have to provide internet connectivity for a lot of different sites and for a lot of different and completely new sites. Some of the grantees had last year in April already established internet activity in a lot of different locations, and then had to shut, I think, 60% of their locations down and reestablish new locations, smaller locations in other sites. So that's a huge strain, certainly on their budget, but also on their personnel and their human resources. And that has been something that has really delayed the deployment of Chromebooks in many locations. That was something we didn't expect. We thought Germany, internet connectivity everywhere, totally easy. Sometimes the connectivity issues are not just getting it set up somewhere, but also getting the permission to set it up, because of some number of the locations are rental locations. So all these kind of difficulties around connectivity we did not expect. Resources, I think it's obvious to everybody that if you have to transition so many centers, closing centers, opening other centers and locations, that this is a drain already in itself, and then adding the component of computers that needed to be deployed and made available, administered, was an additional drain on the resources. The organizations have been incredibly flexible in addressing that, but it clearly had caused a time lag between getting the Chromebooks and then getting them really into use. Privacy concerns and government regulations, that was to be expected in Germany. We faced a lot of concerns about personal data security, what data would be available, would be counted. Those were sometimes difficult to address because they were sometimes just fears, not really based on facts. And so that was challenging for us, and that was really something where we had to usually speak at the site level or on the personal level with the person who had the concerns in order to address the concerns. We also learned about a lot of government regulations that we did not expect that were making life for grantees in Germany challenging. And I'm sure you all are familiar with those situations where there are regulations that suddenly pop up that you did not expect. Organizations, for example, proposed to us to implement loan models for Chromebooks, and then we realized that if an organization loans a Chromebook to an individual for a longer time, this is considered a value that's given to that individual, and then this gets subtracted from the money they get. So there were a lot of things that the organizations had to learn about and then address. I'm seeing there coming some questions, and we'll just in a second we'll take the time to address some of those questions. I'm going to quickly go over some of the implementation challenges we had for NetHope. We had to our initial thinking was we would select a few grantees and then work with these grantees to with a handful or up to 10 or so grantees to help them implement. It turned out that we wouldn't just work with the top level project management at the grantees, but we're really working now down to the site level with the managers on the site to help them deploy the Chromebooks, which is a totally different scale than what we had initially planned. We had to overcome a lot of adoption barriers around cloud computing, where just people on the ground in a lot of the organizations didn't have the experience with cloud computing. So we had to create a documentation and training for them to help them understand how to use cloud computing and how it was beneficial for the work they were doing. For many of the grantees, it was new to use Chromebooks, so that caused, again, that we had to not just work at the top level with them, but really help them get the information all the way to the different sites on how the Chromebooks should be used within that organization in the work with refugees. And then there's just a huge variety of different needs across the audience that are required to adapt to those different needs. Frederick, I saw there's a number of questions. Do we want to address some of them now, or?
Absolutely. This is probably a good time to take a little bit of a break and answer some of the questions that's come in. I've reshuffled them a little bit in the order that they came in, but one that addressed kind of your introduction came in. Somebody was wondering why there were so many implementing partners for the project, and what was the advantage or disadvantage. The suggestion was the National Education or Social Service Network or the Red Cross could have surely achieved the same coverage alone.
Absolutely. That's a very, very good question. So our initial intent was to select, as I mentioned, just a few large grantees and work with those. Turns out that the reality on the ground was a little different. As you said, Red Cross is one of the partners, but then again, in Germany, Red Cross is structured different than it's structured maybe in other countries, but every state in Germany, of the 16 different states, has their own Red Cross, which is then again its own managed unit. And then they are structured different again, because then the regional office also has authority on a lot of things and is their own unit. And so we are actually working with the Red Cross on a number of different levels. And that's actually the same thing for a lot of other organizations as well. There's very few organizations where we work with them at a nation-wide level, and then they coordinate further down. So with a lot of organizations, we not just made one grant, but we made a number of different grants for the different states, or sometimes even for the different regions. That's one of the reasons. The other reason is, as I mentioned initially, a lot of them requested 5,000 Chromebooks, which we kind of said was the upper limit of what they could request. So we had a lot of the organizations requesting 5,000. We made grants to them, but as this is something new to most of these organizations, and these are managed Chromebooks, which are, again, something that even if they have used computers in their initiatives before, they're not familiar with, we made smaller grants. So if they requested 5,000, we might give them a grant of 500 or 1,000, or maybe also sometimes 1,500. And then later on, after the EU-Turkey agreement, when the number of incoming refugees dropped, we got the first feedback that organizations said, ooh, we're starting to close locations. We won't need 5,000. And organizations were very frank to us right away. As soon as they saw that change, they said, we won't need the 5,000. So at that point, we said, okay, we need to take in more grantees, and we made further grants, which we then announced in June, and we started spreading the love to more organizations, and that's why it became more and more organizations. Again, it's based on the fact that instead of working with a few large grantees, we had to diversify and go with a lot of different organizations. But it's a very good point. We would have loved to work with just a few organizations, but it turns out that that was not the way we could make the grants in Germany. And that it's also, it wouldn't have addressed the needs of the organizations in that sense. As I mentioned, some of the organizations just came back and said, oh, we do not need that many Chromebooks as originally requested.
So it sounds like you had quite a dynamic environment there with things changed around, and then when you had the capacity of dealing with multiple recipients or multiple grantees, that in turn provided more coverage on the ground. There was a question early on about how you actually went around to identify who would receive help through the project Reconnect, and obviously we're rather thinking about the sub-grantees here, but maybe also the end users. So how did you make those decisions?
So we select them based on a number of different criteria that we defined early on. It was, some of them was the plan. They proposed to us their plan and how they would use it. They had to tell us how quickly they could implement internet connectivity. So we didn't forget about that, but still many of the organizations in the end couldn't do it as quickly as they had planned to do it. So organizational stability, the plan, the idea that they were trying to implement, the reach that they would have, so how many people they would reach with the Chromebooks that they were using. We did not want to foster a one-on-one system or one Chromebook for one refugee, because we feared that would foster jealousy in Germany. And so we were looking really how many organizations that could reach more scale. So we're looking at reach overall, but also how far would one Chromebook go? So those were just some of the factors we looked at then when evaluating the organizations. But we still looked for a variety as well. And we were very happy that we took some risks. Some of the organizations that were very young, so we couldn't really prove organizational stability, were those organizations that were focused on computer-assisted learning for refugees, totally very, very specific. And those organizations have really proven how valuable they can be and have made great use of the Chromebooks. They actually have taken our initiative to an even more granular level, because these organizations then work with the little volunteer organization in a small village and give them 5 Chromebooks. We cannot make grants of 5 Chromebooks, but this organization then kind of makes a loan to this volunteer organization and helps them use the Chromebook in that small community. And that is really a scale. So we scaled once by using so many organizations, but then they scaled us further by going really with this very small loans into these small volunteer groups. So that helped go further. So, and I forgot the question, Frederick. I'm embarrassed to say. Bring me back on track.
You're definitely addressing the question. There was a somewhat related kind of the next step in the process here. It's a question about how did you manage the tech setup? The setup of the Chromebooks with access to relevant content, whether it was language, training, employment, and so on and so forth.
That was a lesson learned for us in a number of ways. So some of the organizations we expected to be more experienced in using ICT. Even some of the organizations that are, some of the organizations who had their own online content for German learning, even some of those had very little tech, they're not very tech savvy, to say the least. And then when you went down to the site level, the people who were then actually supposed to implement on the ground were not tech savvy at all. So we had to, the managed Chromebooks, what they require initially is that when you receive the Chromebooks, you need to register them once, and then after that you can centrally administer that. Even that that one-time registering it was for some of the organizations a huge task. We advised them all to do that centrally and then distribute. Some of them knew it better and distributed and expected the sites to register in the, you would call it in the, to do the enterprise enrollment, but that was not successful. So really the only way it worked was when it was done centrally at the locations. If we had to redo the same project, we most likely would set it up in a way where we would do the registration initially before we would distribute it to the sites. So I think we would do even more prep work before we would distribute it to the organization, as they just did not really have that the resources planned for that and then experience in doing it. It's not something complicated. It's just you need to do it once. But even that was for some of them something that, with all the other tasks they had, it was something that they would put off.
You mentioned that some of the cloud computing approaches were also new to people. Is there some documentation on the cloud computing training or information? Is that available?
We do have some that we've integrated. So we have done several things. I know there was a question also around content. Initially, we thought some of the large grantees where we had the applications initially, they had competency on what content they wanted to make available. And so the only thing we did around content initially, we put together a content discovery page where we highlighted valuable content for refugees in Germany, and then assumed or expected organizations to take those link tips and integrate them in their own homepage. As we became further along in the project, we had more and more grantees that actually did not have their own homepage for refugees specific. So then we set up our own homepage and portal and created a small app that then was available if the organization choose on all devices, where we just highlighted different internet resources that would specifically help refugees. The documentation around cloud computing, what we did, we created first documentation for the top level for the central IT management, and we created materials that they could distribute down to the sites, or that they could repackage for the sites. But even that repackaging was too much effort, so then we went ahead and created a handbook for the site managers that gave them some basic information, even the basic information that the Chromebooks that they received, the laptops that they received were centrally managed, because even that information didn't make it to some of the sites. So they would receive Chromebooks that were trying to use Facebook, and Facebook wouldn't work because their central administration had said, Facebook is evil, we can't allow that. And the person at the site would try to use Facebook or YouTube and would say, it's not working, this is a stupid device. And so then when we finally sent out the handbook for the site managers and trainers, there was a big aha moment for a lot of them where they're like, oh, okay, I need to ask that this is allowed or this is permitted. And that was quite helpful then. And that information is available. That's in German available. So if anybody's interested in that in German, we're happy to share that. We also have information on the setup of the managed Chromebooks. That is also available in English. And then in that handbook, we have information, basic information on the cloud computing, just an introduction for some of the site managers, what they can do, because often their understanding is, if I cannot install Word, Microsoft Word, the machine is not useful. And so we had to introduce them to how they can use either Word Online or any of the other, like Google Docs or Google Sheets or Excel Online or any of these other online application services in order to do what they want to do.
It sounds like you have a whole host of resources, Sybil, and we'll make sure that we get those from you, and we publish those on the NLG Tech Task Force page. And I'll make sure that.
Is there interest in the German content, or?
Well, people can always access the German, and we can do some machine translation, maybe, or if there's a lot of demand for it, maybe we will. Sure. Make an effort of getting it translated.
We're trying to make some available also in other languages. What we're also just starting to do is doing more of the video, little quick video explanations on how to do certain things. And what we want to do is encourage more of the sites to create their own little videos in that direction, so that we have a broader spread of those.
Sybil, we're going to get a little tight on time. We probably have another 5 to 8 minutes to go here. Do you want to, we have several questions we haven't gotten to yet, and they're great questions. But do you want to go through the rest of your slides, or do you want to continue with the questions?
I would highlight, there's one, just talking briefly about partnerships. One of our largest grantees is actually an association of adult education centers. They have their own content site. And what was interesting here is that they actually got a grant for 19 million euros from the government for an initiative that was trying to use blended learning in order to get refugees earlier on in German language learning, so that they wouldn't have to wait until they get a place in the 6 months long integration courses, but that they can start their language learning earlier. And that's one of our grantees. And that's really nice to see how we were able to support government initiatives on that. The other one is just online language mentoring, which is an interesting partnership we had with Volunteer Vision, an organization that matches corporate mentors with refugees then. So that we would match them with a nonprofit organization, and then they would, the mentors would get some training on how to do the language training, and they had like a script and everything, and then they would actually work with one of the nonprofits, or actually in the end with one of the refugees then. And what was interesting to see is that it went far beyond the language training then, that the mentors would actually provide guidance on job professional training, or what jobs might be interesting for them and how to get into that environment, all these kind of things. So very interesting partnership. Cisco provides free courses, for online courses for the grantees, and we have a number of grantees that successfully completed, or not grantees, but refugees at the grantee organizations that successfully completed some of the introductory courses, or even some of the professional courses from Cisco. So that has been a great partnership as well. Super for our grantees to get some professional training. The other stuff we don't need. So yeah, we can go back to the questions.
Excellent. And as we're rounding off with the questions, Leila will also come back and have a couple closing statements. But let's take a couple of questions, and then while you're answering that, I'm probably going to put up the webinar satisfaction poll, so if people would please answer those questions also. That'll work the same way as the earlier poll we displayed.
So I'll try to answer more sharply.
Yes. When the students use the Chromebooks, to what degree is it needed to have local support and educational personnel kind of in the room, complementing the technology?
It is required. The Chromebooks are super easy to use, so you can log in anonymously, and then it immediately opens the Chrome browser and goes to the homepage that was centrally set up to be the homepage. So that part is really easy, and then it really depends on the content that is used by the sites. But I have to admit that any of the content that is used in the sites requires at least initial kickoff training. So whether it's the training from for language learning in Germany, any of those trainings, it's usually helpful to have an initial kickoff training where they learn how to use the that online tool. Most successful is really when there's somebody helping along the way, is available for questions, helps set goals when you want to reach something, you know, when you want to reach a certain step within the learning. That has been the most successful. And the organizations have set up a lot of different ways in which to provide that kind of mentoring along the way. They call it learning guide, or they really have a mentor who is there. They have the trainer, so there's a lot of different variety. But yes, if there is somebody there who follows along with the students, then it's most successful.
Excellent. There was another question on privacy. If students log in to training resources, who's responsible for protecting their privacy? Is it the learning platform provider? Is it Project Reconnect, or is it the grantees?
A good question. The student, so they don't log in, like on the device, there's nothing that remains back. Once the student ends their session, the device is completely clean again. So they don't log into our system. It's like they log in, the learning page is the learning page from the training provider. And so the organization doesn't really take responsibility for that. So it's the host organization that hosts that content. We have not put any content directly on the device itself. We give access to the internet content. So that's the same thing that the other organizations then do. They provide access to the content. And then when you go to a training site, that training site is responsible then to safeguard the private information they receive. We just advise the organizations that they teach the refugees early on about what to share, what not to share, but that's something we learned, that the refugees themselves are very careful with their personal information, usually.
Excellent. I think we may have time for one more quick question. Or as a matter of fact, we do not. I'm sorry. What we're going to do, we're going to look at these questions, and for the ones we didn't get to, we may work with Sybil to get a Q&A document placed on the... questions
around some of the partners that I just briefly zoomed over. I'm happy to share or make introductions or give you the contact for those. No problem at all.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm going to turn it over to Leila real quick for a couple of closing statements, and then we'll finish up. Leila?
Great. Thank you so much, Sybil. Thank you, Frederick, for facilitating. So thank you all for joining us today. And just closing, please take time and make sure to sign up for the task force so you can get invitations to our upcoming webinars. As mentioned, we'll be featuring tech solutions like Udemy, Coursera, Microsoft, and their NGO partners and the programs they're implementing. And then also check Technology Task Force website for the materials that were referenced on today's webinar. We'll use the questions that you shared to curate those materials so they meet your needs. And feel free to email us if you have any additional questions. Thanks again. Looking forward to hearing from you and, again, reconvening at the end of April. Have a great day.
Thank you very much, Leila. I just want to reiterate for everyone that the recording and the materials that were presented here today will go in the webinar posting on the NetHope Solutions Center, and a link to the NLG Tech Task Force page there will also have a reference to all of the different resources we were talking about here today. So again, thanks everyone. Thanks Sybil. Thanks Leila. Thanks for a great interactive audience, and I wish you a great rest of your day, morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.